Welcome to the Unbecoming Hub podcast. Reflections about being human without treating yourself as something to fix. I'm your host, Lacey Kelly. Thinking about what I wanted to record this week, and for some reason I just kept having this memory pop up over and over about this camping trip my husband and I took a while ago, a couple years ago maybe, and we were backpacking and we'd hiked a ridiculous amount of miles in one day because that's just what we did back then. And when you do that, you got 30-pound pack on your back, you're hiking 20 miles in a day because you're dumb. And you get to a campsite and it just doesn't matter where you camp at that point. You're just tired. You can't be picky. And I like to camp outside of campsites, like near the campsite, but not in the campsite. Because campsites are loud, there's a lot of people, just kind of not the point of why you go backpacking into the middle of the forest. And I saw on the map there was this lake near a campsite. I'm like, let's camp by the lake. That'll be fun. I had never been to this lake before. And we get down there to the lake and it's just like goes from mountain to water. Like there's no flat ground. Here the lake is basically on a bunch of cliff edges. So I was like, this is probably not going to work. But we found a little spot. It was very steep, very rocky, very uncomfortable. And I was up that night, most of the night, partially because of the environment, partially because I suck at sleeping. And I was sitting outside of the tent, so I wasn't too disturbing to my husband. And also, I wanted to be outside. I mean, being in a tent awake is dumb. You might as well step outside the tent and enjoy the view. So I was sitting outside and we were pretty far away from anything, no humans around. And there's something about being out in the middle of nowhere with no other humans around that just really puts you in your place. Humans, we walk around like we own the place, but then you go out to the middle of nowhere and you spend the night and you're like, what was that? What was that sound? Did you see that? Am I seeing something? Kind of trip out. And I was sitting there feeling like, wow, I am so unprepared for this environment. So unprepared and so out of my place. And I remember thinking just how silly that was because I'm a human. I'm a human being feeling out of place in nature, feeling unequipped to handle the environment that was around me. And that made me a little sad. In my fantasy world, like I could be some survivalist, we all can be because we're human and that's just what we do. But that you have to like learn the skill because it's not our environments anymore. And I'm telling this story and I was thinking about this because I think it really illustrates the point of the quality of adaptation that we have as humans that allow us to adapt to the environment that we're in. And those adaptations take time to develop, but depending on the environment you're born into, that's what you're going to adapt to. And I remember thinking, like, wow, can you imagine being born into the environment of just the wild? You have to adapt to the wild. What a different life that would be. What a different brain that would create. What a different personality and perspective on the world when you're adapting to the conditions, the weather and the terrain and food, like how it was before our modern culture. And so, what happens to humans when we have to adapt to emotional conditions? We have to adapt to the interpersonal dynamics of a single family home. Like those are the conditions we're born into now. Born into the conditions of an isolated family unit. And so if back in the day, before modern culture, we were adapting to the weather and the terrain and other species that could be threatening, the priority wouldn't be the relational dynamics. I mean, it's a factor, but it's certainly not a priority. And instead, your body, your nervous system, your brain, your personality, all of who you are or who you feel you are is adapting to that, to the conditions. And so now, fast forward, we are adapting to our single family home, our family dynamics, interpersonal relationships. And so we become organized around that. Like those are the conditions. So if back in the day, a threat was wildlife or a different species, now your threat is anger, right? Or explosive temper, or addiction in the home, or emotional absence, you name it. And that's what we shape ourselves around. What a difference. Also worth saying that we shape ourselves around environments where things went really well too. And we'll get into that. It doesn't have to be something bad or that something went wrong. So today is a bit of a follow-up from last week, where we established that the premise that most of us operate from is that something is missing or that we need fixing. And we learned that our vulnerability, our adaptations and protections are inherent capacities to being human, and that everything we need to navigate life is already within us. It's all evidence that our system actually works really well, not evidence that it's failed in any way. And so it raises the next obvious question here. So if the system works so well, if our inherent capacity is to adapt and to be vulnerable, why can we feel so stuck? Why do we keep doing the same things we hate doing over and over in the same patterns, the same kind of relationships? And what is the point? Why is it so hard to change? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to focus in on that adaptation idea, what it actually means to adapt. I think one of the most important factors in all of this that a lot of the self-help model out there almost never accounts for is that we were not adults when we made most of our foundational adaptations. We were children. So it matters a lot because childhood is where personality develops. So when an adult moves to a new city or starts a new job or enters a new relationship, they're adapting to those conditions with a fully formed adult self that processes things. So there's a sense of being in relationship to the thing that they're experiencing that's new, the new conditions. It feels like the adaptation kind of sits on top of the personality and gets recognizable as an adaptation. It can feel like something you picked up, which means it feels like you can put it down. So the adult in new conditions is entirely different than the child in conditions. So in childhood, we're adapting to the specific emotional weather of your caregivers, your siblings, your school, your neighborhood. But you're not adapting as a person. You're adapting into a person. That's totally different, to adapt into a person versus as a person. So adaptation and personality are forming at the same time in the same process. They're completely woven together. So when there's no self as a referencing point, the self is kind of just unfolding in the conditions and the weather that it's being exposed to. And again, in our modern day culture, that's usually our family systems or the situations close to us. So emotional belonging, a sense of feeling seen or connected, now feel like the most important pieces to it. Because that child that maybe doesn't have any reference point for terrain or starvation, seasons of drought, like real drought, like these kinds of things. And that was a reality for some folks growing up, with limited resources and scarcity of resources. But for a lot of us in our first world, a lot of that's taken care of. So the next layer of threat is largely interpersonal. And this is why these are the things that people come to therapy for, these adaptations in adulthood, like the people pleasing or emotional shutdown, hypervigilance, because they feel so much like who they are rather than something they do. And the patterns that we can see, they were present at the formation of the self. So they don't feel like a coat you're putting on. It feels like the skin you're in. It feels like you're fused with it. Those are the elements of us that can get confused as pathology, which it's not. It's adaptation. And all of that makes perfect sense. That your personality forming alongside the adaptations, that they can become fused and feel like who you are when they're not who you are. And to kind of come back to something I mentioned just a few moments ago, that I think one of the things that can bug me the most about this idea of adaptation and these patterns that are later called pathology or labeled as problems, make us think we're broken, is that the standard self-help and therapy model looks at these things and they can draw a certain conclusion that if the adaptation is deep, then it means something must have gone wrong. And the implicit message is that if you just had a more attuned caregiver, a more stable environment, a more consistent experience of being seen, that you wouldn't be like this. And it's just not true. I'm here to tell you that is false. And that paradigm puts so much pressure on parents today in our modern culture because, and this is wonderful, but a lot of parents are going to therapy to have young children because they're not wanting to pass on some of the emotional disturbances they experienced because, again, they were born into an environment where a lot of those first world necessities were met. There weren't major threats going on. And so that emotional interpersonal belonging feels like the biggest area of threat. So then they don't want to pass on that to their children. So they come to therapy to work on that. And then, of course, their first thought is like, I don't want to mess up my kids. So I need to be emotionally available all the time, make sure I'm hyper attuned and I'm really paying attention to their needs and their feelings. It puts so much pressure on parents. And that's a whole other podcast, honestly, the parent-child dynamic from childhood to adulthood. But the point of all of that is to say it's not true, because humans adapt. It is a quality we have. It is inherent capacity. It is a beautiful, resourceful, wonderful aspect of being human. So a more attuned caregiver would not produce a person without adaptations, because we're human and we adapt. That's what we do. It would have produced a person with different adaptations calibrated to that environment instead of this one. So the adaptations that you have are not the byproduct of something going wrong. They're the byproduct of being a child, which means being a developing organism in a specific set of conditions that form a self in response to those conditions. That's what it means. That's it. That's all. It doesn't mean anything went wrong. It doesn't mean that if it was just this other way, that you wouldn't have patterns that are driving you nuts as an adult. I mean, you're going to. And I don't want to discount. Sometimes the conditions that children are born into are genuinely hard. I've worked with countless number of awful abuse cases, major emotional neglect, all different kinds of things. And of course, those form their own set of adaptations. But I also get a lot of folks that their experiences were pretty ordinary, pretty normal homes, you would say. General inconsistencies of caregivers that were in their own struggles and life demands. So the adaptations happen either way, because that is what personality development is. It's inevitable. And the self-help model can turn it into a story about damage and attunement deficits and what should have happened differently. And that story is not only inaccurate, but it can actively make the work harder because it just makes people feel like they're tending to some kind of wound or brokenness instead of relating to themselves and their whole family system as a system to understand. It's like if you plop somebody in Arizona in the heat, they're going to adapt to that set of conditions. And then if you go put that person over on the East Coast in the winter, they're not going to be adapted to that. But if you take that person and you put them over in the winter and they're not handling it well because they're used to the heat, they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Why are you feeling this way? Like, well, I'm not adapted to this. So, our adaptations are a product of the environment, and they make sense when you look at it all in context. And I've found in working with people, that's honestly one of the biggest reliefs, is this feeling like, okay, it makes sense. And I don't have to have a negative view of my entire family system in order for me to make sense. So when we're talking about adaptation, I think a useful way to think about it is that your adaptations, that you formed in childhood, they're like your software. They're programs that are very sophisticated and well tested, but they were written to run in a specific environment. So they worked and they did what they were supposed to do, but they were for a specific environment. And the problem is that we carry that software into adulthood, but then we mistake it for the hardware. So we're like, it's just how I'm wired. It's just how I am. We think the shutdown during an argument is a fundamental feature of who we are, and not a program that was written for a specific set of conditions that might not actually apply or be relevant anymore. So an adult adapting to new conditions knows they're adapting. And if they slow down enough, they can feel the gap between who they were and what the new environment requires. When the software was written during personality development in childhood, there's no gap there. It's just you. It's just the soup you're swimming in. I have people say that a lot as we unpack different things they're coming to therapy for is, I didn't realize I was doing that. It's like, well, of course you didn't realize you were doing that. You were adapting. It's instinctive. It's your human capacity playing out. So the good news is that software can be updated. It's not fixed. It's not permanent. It's not identity in a fixed way. But this is important. It doesn't update through insight alone. I think a lot of us can get frustrated with that because we can know intellectually that a pattern is an adaptation, but it does not change the pattern. I have so many people that come to therapy that gain all this awareness and understanding, and they're like, but nothing's different. Why isn't it changing? Insight can help you kind of see it and say, oh, okay, makes sense. But our adaptations were a nervous system response. They're a body response. They're the instinctive response to the environment. So the process to actually change has to happen on an integration level, which is in the body. And that happens through relationship. It's through staying in contact with a pattern as it runs, noticing it without trying to override it. And then over time, slowly, you're giving your body new information about where it actually is now. So it's kind of orienting your body to time, which is so helpful. So the relationship to the pattern is what changes, not necessarily the understanding of it. And, if you've been in any kind of self-help therapy space, you may have heard about like grounding exercises that have you pay attention to different things you see and hear and touch and feel. But I have found the most important orientation tool to help a person go, oh yeah, this isn't actually me. This is like an adaptation. That was for those specific set of conditions. It's not here now. The most important orientation is time. Reminding yourself of what's present, who's present in the room, what year it is. It sounds silly, but it's actually really effective. It's like, oh yeah, I can say this thing and, my partner's not going to respond like my parent did because they're not my parent and I'm not a child, I'm 34 or however old you are. It helps a lot. So think about it like updating, but it's not like repairing your nervous system. It's helping your body adapt to the conditions that are present now as an adult with that gap in space in your mind. And again, like that personality development piece as those adaptations are running, it's so deep. It feels like so who we are. And it was over a significant period of time. So once you start to actually work with a pattern or understand or relate to it differently, it's going to take a little bit of time for your body to say, oh yeah, this is different now. So when you stop treating your adaptations as evidence of damage or your patterns like they're pathological, you're not trying to fix something that went wrong anymore. And you're actually working with your human system that has responded exactly the way it's supposed to in conditions that no longer actually exist. But even that simple shift, like, oh yeah, everything's working exactly the way it's supposed to. There's nothing wrong with me. It's such a relief, honestly. So we're not asking what is wrong with me. It's more of like, what environment was this built for? And what does it need to know about where I am now? So maybe, this week when you notice a pattern you'd normally judge yourself for, don't try to stop it. Just stay with it. Notice it running. What year does my body think it is, you might ask? Or what conditions is this program still trying to navigate? What is here now instead? It's funny, sometimes we can get thrown into environments as an adult that feel so foreign. It's like me sitting out on that lake at night being like, oh my God, I'm so out of my element. I'm so in my element and out of my element at the same time. So aware of my place. So aware that I wouldn't make it out here. And sometimes we find ourselves in relationships or interactions that are so fundamentally different than the conditions we're used to. It can almost like put us on edge a little bit, you know? Like if you were with someone in a relationship and maybe they weren't super nice, and then you go on a date with someone and they're really nice to you, you're like, what is this? What's your angle here, buddy? That's what I'm talking about. Like the body can take some time to catch up. So it helps to just slow down and recognize and give yourself some space. See it as an adaptation, not who you are. And pay attention to your current conditions. Like, how are they different from personality development conditions, from your prior relationship? And it just helps your body get a little bit of a push, a little nudge along, orienting to the time. So I think that's it for this one. I talk about this a lot in my book, The Process of Unbecoming, how integration matters more than insight and how time isn't linear, just these little shifts and changes. So you can check that out if you want. All right, until next time. You can find more of this work at theunbecominghub.com. Until next time.